Once again, your participation on the discussion boards and the questions you have posed have been very interesting. I think we're going to take this final office hours in two distinct directions. First, many of you wanted to amplify and discuss vocational training and vocational education as a way of coping with the challenges of globalization. Good idea, because there have actually been some recent divergences in what has been going on in vocational education. On the one hand, in the United States, community colleges that have developed school-to-work type programs, that is to say, specific curricula for specific training for specific industries, often including the participation of representatives from the industries themselves, have proved to be quite successful, especially when they can result in accreditation so that the graduates have these degrees and certificates very portable so that they can move around the country, and employers in the industry, any place in the United States or Canada, know exactly what kind of training they are getting. Community colleges have also been increasingly effective in job counseling and to a certain extent in helping with job placement. Some of you noted that this is very similar to programs that you participated in the military, in the U.S. military, training for particular skills and then getting a bit of job counseling before leaving the armed services. In fact, I would like to ask some of our colleagues who are not U.S. citizens whether or not the military training in your countries has had this same kind of vocational component. Well, that's the good news. The bad news is that there have been some problems bordering on scandals in for-profit vocational education, in which some private institutions, for-profit institutions, have been very good at advertising the skills that they can provide. And they have been very good at setting students up with fairly large student loans, which the for-profit schools then immediately pocket. And the success of such programs has been very limited. For example, in four-year programs at for-profit vocational institutions, the percentage that went from the end of year one successfully into year two was no more than 30%. That is to say, there was a 70% dropout rate between year one and any successive years. The percentage that completed four-year courses at for-profit vocational institutions within 6 years, that is to say, they didn't just give them 4 years to do it, but within 6 years, only 5% of those who enrolled got through to the final graduation and certification. And then many of those who did drop out or didn't make it through were left with quite large burdens of student loans. So there are proposals to reform and even regulate for-profit vocational training. Also, I have to say the comparisons of the costs are quite astounding. So that a course for a nurse's assistant program in a for-profit institution may be 3, 4, 5 times higher than it would be in a nearby community college. The second area where you had questions was completely distinct, and you asked, why are we reforming the U.S. budget process? Why do we want to change entitlements, Social Security, and Medicaid? Are you asking us to do this just so that we can use the savings to pay for the costs of globalization? There was even some criticism and skepticism in your questions. I welcome that, and let's go back through, therefore, what our purpose has been. We have tried to focus on the adjustments and dislocations and costs of globalization, as well as the benefits and successes. And in these last weeks of the course, we have tried to come up with recommendations like improvements in community colleges, which we just discussed. That will cost money. And the usual way of operating in Washington is to propose some expensive new programs and then say, okay, good luck with funding them, and kind of walk away from the problem. We have tried to be more responsible than that. So I have asked you to figure out ways to pay for the adjustment costs of globalization, yes, but within the broader context. The principal U.S. entitlement programs, namely Social Security and Medicare, are not sustainable beyond about 10, 15, at the most 20 years. There are really going to be requirements for large cutbacks after the end of the next decade. The time to plan for those is now, and to figure out exactly how to reform them so that they will be viable. So as part of making the U.S. budget deficit sustainable, not cutting it entirely, but having it maintained at maybe 60% of GDP, I am asking you to look at the reform of entitlements, look at the reform of tax policies, and at the end of the day, figure out a way to be responsible in helping those who are left behind or dislocated or damaged by the process of globalization.